Steel Ball Run is filled to the brim with a lot of great antagonists over its 7-year run. Each of them are memorable in their own ways, be it Ringo Rotogan and his true man world ideals, or Wiccapipo and his connection to Gyro's past. Though there's one character who managed to shine through based on his personality, weird quirks, and stand alone. This is someone who isn't connected to any major party or faction throughout all of Steel Ball Run either, and that is the eccentric yet well-mannered assassin, Magenta Magenta.
And I'll give you my heart.
So will you.
Again and again and again, again and again.
Magenta Magenta is a minor antagonist introduced in Chapter 51 of Steel Ball Run, and he was introduced alongside Wiccapipo, which are both a mark for first time in Hirohiko Araki's entire JoJo career, which is that they were both named after a Japanese musician. This being Sold Out, a Japanese hip-hop band which Araki worked with during the production of the original Phantom Blood movie. Because you see, for the Phantom Blood movie, they created an album called Voodoo Kingdom, which featured 2 different songs, Voodoo Kingdom and Grown Kids, which were going to be the themes of the movie and were written from the perspective of Jonathan and Dio. But since the movie was a huge disaster and Araki scrapped any release outside of theaters, the songs were released later by themselves without the movie connecting them. And one day I'd actually like to go through the songs and examine them further, but this isn't the video for that. But it is an important factor to why these two have their names, because you see, when Sold Out and Araki had that falling out, Araki tried to make it up to them by creating both the album artwork for their album Catwalk, and also chose to include them as a reference in his currently running part of JoJo a year later. Post-editing fact check, actually. It turns out that Araki had made the album cover in 2006 for them, which allowed him to gain good relationships with Sold Out, which allowed them to work on his 2007 Phantom Blood movie, in which they provided an entire album for it. Since Araki scraps the Phantom Blood movie after theatrical release, as forgiveness, Araki included Wiccapipo and Magenta Magenta in the Steel Ball Run, since he was already good friends with the people at the time, and he wanted to make up for the fact that they had worked hard on an album for his movie that he scrapped. And thus, this is the musical origin of Magenta Magenta's name. It is a direct reference to a Sold Out song called Magenta Magenta, though that's basically where the reference of the name stops. But I should address something about Magenta Magenta's name since we're talking about it. And hopefully you haven't already scrolled down to the comment section to correct me, because his name is actually something up for debate. Because you see, in the JoJo Velar, his name is translated as Magent Magent. But if we're looking at the Romanji, or the translation of his name, it is Magento Magento. So I have opted up to just calling him Magenta Magenta as a direct reference to the song itself, even though it's possible that it is Magento Magento. And I've also been saying it like this for 5 to 6 years now, so it's hard to change pronunciations like that. But yes, the song Magenta Magenta doesn't exactly fit the character themes of Magenta Magenta, as it's about a wild, crazy night out with a girl with magenta lips, and as they make passionate love for 3 hours and 10 minutes, starting at 11:50 p.m. and ending at 3 a.m. Though, the meaning of Magenta Magenta's name actually might come from more of the color magenta. So the man Magenta Magenta actually reflects the primary color that is magenta, as magenta the color is actually one of the real primary colors, which is the basis for all colors known today. The other 2 true primary colors are cyan and yellow, and any combination of these colors is what makes up all colors known today. So given that magenta's position as a primary color means that it is found in nature, it fits that Magenta Magenta's ability allows him to ground himself to the land below him, physically connecting Magenta Magenta to nature itself. This ability is known as 20th Century Boy. 20th Century Boy is a wearable stand which was designed much like the exoskeleton of an insect, specifically something along the lines of a grasshopper or a lobster. It applies itself like shoulder guards and belts to the user, as the long thin pieces come equipped with small little arms that grip onto Magenta's body and hold themselves into place. Araki has described these thin pieces as having the characteristics of belts as it stretches out along the user's body. Now stats wise, it has a destructive power of non-applicable, as the stand itself cannot fight, but that doesn't mean that it cannot do damage to the area around it, but all of its power is dependent on outside forces. It is a C in speed, non-applicable in range, again, it all depends on the attack delivered to Magenta while the ability is activated, an A in durability, a D in precision, and a C in developmental potential. 20th Century Boy actually has one ability, and that is Absolute Defense. Absolute Defense is when Magenta Magenta dons 20th Century Boy, and from the moment that the ability activates, Magenta Magenta is connected to the ground below him and is able to transfer any damage inflicted to him to that area. So if per se he was shot while 20th Century Boy was activated, much like how Johnny's Act 2 bullets work, the holes would slide off Magenta Magenta and onto the ground below him. Or if per se Magenta Magenta were to strap explosives to himself and then activate 20th Century Boy, this would transfer the destructive force of the explosives to the area below him while leaving him completely unharmed. This ability allows him to avoid dying and possibly is a reference to the amazing durability of animals or insects with exoskeletons, such as cockroaches or mantis shrimps. Now, the one downside of 20th Century Boy, and it's a big one, is that when Magenta Magenta is using it, he must drop down to a seemingly defenseless pose. This is due to 20th Century Boy robbing Magenta Magenta of the ability to stand or even move. This action leaves him open to any surprise attacks that he might not think is coming, and leaves him absolutely defenseless to anyone who already understands how his ability works. So much so that people who can't even see stands like Wikipedia can see right through his actions. This weakness is also what allows Magenta Magenta to share a similar fate with beings such as Cars and Anubis, though I find that his is the most tragic of them all, given that he was just doing his job for the President of the United States, and he wasn't some ancient evil sword that mind-controlled people or some genocidal perfectionist. And let's not forget that the reason he reached the brain-dead state where he just stopped thinking altogether is because he honestly thought someone was coming to save him. And he waited and waited and waited until he couldn't wait anymore. He was just some guy. Now, the song 20th Century Boy, funny enough, fits the theme of songs from Japan. Even though it actually comes from an English glam rock band named T-Rex, the single 20th Century Boy was actually recorded first in Tokyo, Japan. Then mixing this with the T-Rex's near Beatles level fame during that time made 20th Century Boy extremely popular in Japan. More than expected, actually. It was so popular it actually ended up inspiring the name of one of the longer and critically acclaimed running manga series by Naoki Urasawa, that being 20th Century Boys. Now, the song itself actually fits with the antagonists of the Wrecking Ball arc, as the lyrics describe two different people. First starting with, his friends say he's fine, his friends say he's good, everyone says he's just like Robin Hood. This describes Wikipedia almost to a T, as he is someone who embodies the ideas of someone who is good at their job, but also someone who's deep down good at heart. Given that he has a face turn after he's defeated, working to help the goals of both Gyro and Johnny after Gyro saved his sister, from there, you also have lyrics that describe someone else. I move like a cat, I talk like a rat, I sting like a bee, baby I wanna be your man. These are all details that describe Magenta Magenta almost perfectly. As you see, during his assassinations, he is all about movement and positioning himself into places outside of danger so he can kill effectively and efficiently. So much so that he gives Steven Steele a ruler so he can kill him in the most effective way possible. This is because he hunts much like a cat, trying to avoid as much danger or effort as possible. Also, when talking, he has a very rat-like description, given that he was described to be very dirty and gross in his translations, as they made mention that Magenta Magenta was written in a way that made it so his voice came off as loud, nasally, and annoying, or downright disgusting to listen to, which actually kind of fits the themes of being very rat-like, or talking much like a rat.
Oh, were you watching? Hey, just thought of a funny joke. Critique it for me, will ya? It's a gag using this chunk of ice. First, you gotta pretend to cry with me, alright? Pretend to cry. You have to get into it. Be real sad. Together now, alright? I'm so sad. It hurts so bad. I'm sad. Tears of a Himalayan Yeti.
And of course, stinging like a bee is in reference to his style of assassinations, where he uses a suppressed revolver which makes his kills sudden, quick, and quiet. You know, much like a bee sting. And as the song goes on, the singer describes himself as someone who can fly planes and drive cars, and this all fits into Magenta's overall character, as one of the more memorable aspects of his character is the fact that he is always whining and complaining about his work and his environment, bringing up that instead of taking a sled and horses that they should have hunted Johnny and Gyro via airplane, as it means it would be quicker and he wouldn't have to get as cold. This reliance on technology might also play into the themes of being a 20th century boy, as he wants to use the technology of the next generation, or the 20th century, to make his job easier. Now, the reason all these songs' meanings that are projected onto Magenta Magenta are from the singer's perspective is because he himself is based visually off of the lead singer of T-Rex, Mark Barlon, given that they both share the same hairstyle and the cover of the single for 20th Century Boy looks like this. I mean, come on. Basically the same person. And do I even have to mention his connection to Dio and how the fact that his references come from a band named T-Rex? Like, is that even worth mentioning? I think that's pretty obvious. And now with all these elements coming together, it's what makes Magenta Magenta such a lovable character, as he's not only very grounded and understandable as a person, he also comes off as one of the more realistic in his setting, as his constant complaining about the work and the environment around him can come off as very relatable, because even though he's a paid killer and has magic superpowers, he's like anyone else. He recognizes and addresses the environment that he's in, he also thinks that his work is too hard, or even if only he had an airplane, that he could go wherever he needed to go and he would save so much time. These are all common complaints that help the reader understand him as a person. Though to make sure that we didn't relate too much to him, Araki made sure to write him in with a very annoying voice that adds an element of scumminess to everything that he does, and also gave him really weird little gross quirks, such as licking the cough spit off his fingers, or giving him a snotty running nose. All of these features are designed to gross out the reader in a way, to give a balance of understanding and disgust. Then you take all of this and stack it on top of his reliance on technology, be it the suppressor on his revolver, or the untested airplanes that he wants to fly, or even as simple as him thinking Wikipedia is stronger than Gyro just because his steel bottles are more modern and complex, as his reliance on this technology is what makes him the 20th Century Boy we know and love, but it is also this reliance on technology that bounds him up and drags him to the bottom of the river, where eventually he stops thinking. And if you enjoyed this video and want to help support more videos like it in the future, I have a Patreon over at patreon.com/ManyNotTheBadGuy. And if you want to become a 22nd Century Boy and live out an amazing life, become basically invincible, then I recommend heading on over to Funimation.com/show/Shimonetta, boring world where the concept of dirty jokes doesn't exist, and get yourself a copy of Shimonetta on Blu-ray DVD, and you'll just be invincible. It's literally like just equipping a 20th Century Boy. You literally just put it on top of your head, and it takes away all damage.